haunted wedding dress. A dress that moves and dances on its own. She's the character of Miss Havisham, the rich, eccentric old man who was abandoned by her boyfriend on her wedding night, and time stopped for her at that moment, not only in terms of feeling, but in reality, as she kept everything around her as it was at that moment and kept wearing her wedding dress for the rest of her life. On a green asma, he stands alone, neither Anis nor Ness, as if he does not belong to this world, and indeed who sees him at first glance is considered a Greek temple thousands of years old. But what brought a Greek temple to the American state of Pennsylvania? Of course it's not a temple, it's a house. Or rather a palace built by a wealthy man in the middle of the 19th century and wanted to be something special to be proud of on his wealthy counterparts and businessmen. That rich man named Elias Baker, an iron merchant from Blair County. Elias spent a lot of money on this luxury mansion, which took 5 years to build, and moved in 1849 with his wife, 2 children and his only daughter Anna. The palace witnessed at the height of its glory and the glory of its days lavish parties and evenings during which all eyes were directed towards the beautiful daughter Anna, spoiling her father, who was not slack with anything on her. Many came forward to marry Anna, but her father always confronted them with rejection. He wanted his daughter to have a very special marriage, perhaps from a high-ranking army officer, an influential senator, a prince, a descendant of a noble family, or even a king. Why not? At that time many wealthy Americans did not hesitate to pay huge amounts of money to marry their daughters from members of the European royal families, especially those who lost their thrones and made up bankruptcy. They bought descent and title for money. They wanted their daughters to become princesses, countesses and dukes. But unfortunately Elias, the heart of his daughter did not relate to the proportions, but related to a miserable employee in one of his factories. She fell in love with the poor young man and insisted on marrying him despite the anger of her father and his threats, so that she secretly bought a beautiful wedding dress in order to give it to her groom who was going to escape with him. But at the last moment the father discovered her plan and prevented her from going out and locked her in her room for days, weeks and months. As for the handsome poor lover, the father expelled him from his factory, and not only this, but exerted his influence on politicians and police to keep the poor young man out of the whole state after threatening him with imprisonment and murder. After a long time the father allowed his daughter to go out again, but she is no longer as she was. She lost her glasses, as a flower withered, became sad and full of all time. Something broke within her forever, especially after she broke the news of her lover, probably convinced the young man impossible to marry her, so he decided to go on with his life, perhaps married and gave birth to another woman in a distant city. As for Anna, her time stopped at that moment when her father prevented her from going out and catching up with her lover, and later refused to marry despite all the attempts and temptations of her father, and she remained unhappy for the rest of her life. And the years have passed in turn. The rich father is dead. The mother is dead. Their children died. In the end, there was only Anna. She became an old woman, sitting alone every evening in that cold, lonely palace, staring with eyes dripping with sadness and sorrow to the white wedding dress hanging in the corner of her room. That dress she never wore. She did not dance with him on her wedding night as every bride does, and did not touch him and caressed her buttons, the hopes of her promised groom. How painful are memories when they are associated with pain and sorrow. Finally, on a somber rainy morning of 1914, the servants found Anna dead in her bed, tears in her eyes as she embraced her wedding dress in her hands. With Anna's death, he closed the palace, drowned in the dark, there on the lonely knoll abandoned. Sad and sad. But years later, the provincial government decided to buy the palace from the heirs and turned it into a museum. The beauty of this museum is that all its belongings remained the same: furniture, mirrors, paintings, clothing, etc. Inside the museum is like going back to Victorian times to live its charming atmosphere with image and sound. Perhaps the most distinctive room in that museum is Anna's room, which is located on the second floor, and what attracts the most attention to that room is her wedding dress, which she never wore and kept in a glass box. Strangely enough, many of those who visited this museum swore they saw the dress move into its glass box. It's not just a normal move, it's a shake from one side to the other, like the dress is dancing. According to museum staff, that vibration was most intense on the moonlit nights, which is that the dress is haunted. The intensity of Anna's attachment to that dress prompts her ghost to return to the palace from time to time to dance silently, as she embraces the dress she has always dreamed of wearing and dancing in her life, like any happy bride on her wedding night. Today, Anna's wedding dress is one of the strangest haunted things in the world.